All right, so you know how oil is kind of everywhere?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously we know it's in like gas and stuff.
Right.
But it's also in like the road we drive on.
Yeah.
The plastic in our phones.
Mm-hmm.
Even the fertilizer that helps grow our food.
It's true.
So we're going to do a deep dive today on this global dependence we all have on oil.
Yeah.
Try to figure out why we're so hooked.
Okay.
And honestly, see if we can figure out how to wean ourselves off.
Right.
You might be surprised how much oil is just woven into like every part of our lives.
Yeah.
And how tricky it might be to just break up with oil.
Yeah, it really is. I think what's really interesting is like how our perception of oil has evolved over time. Like,
okay.
it started as the symbol of like progress
All
and
right.
liberation,
Oh, interesting.
ushering in like the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
But now it's become like a source of global anxiety.
It's true. It's
Yeah.
true. It is kind of a love-hate relationship, isn't it?
Totally.
Because
Oh.
early on, oil was this miracle,
Right.
the key to unlocking economic growth
Well, exactly.
and connecting the world.
Mm-hmm.
But now we're burning through like 100 million barrels of oil every day.
Every single day.
And the environmental consequences are just undeniable.
Yeah.
I mean, we're seeing the impacts of climate change like all around us.
Yes, the narrative has definitely shifted from oil as like a liberator
Right.
to oil as like a potential threat.
Yeah.
But it's not just an abstract threat, you know?
Right.
It's something that impacts you very directly, from
Mhm.
the price you pay at the pump to the air that you breathe.
You're absolutely right. I was reading that the World Health Organization
Yeah.
estimates that air pollution, which a lot of it comes from burning fossil fuels,
Mm-hmm.
contributes to millions of premature deaths every year.
It's crazy.
It's a crazy statistic.
It is.
And it makes you realize this isn't just some far-off environmental issue.
Yeah.
It's like a public health crisis.
Totally. And the connection between burning oil and climate change is just undeniable. I mean, every barrel of oil that we burn releases hundreds of kilograms of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere.
Okay.
And that CO2 acts like a blanket trapping heat and leading to a gradual warming of the planet.
Yeah, I get the whole like CO2 as a blanket analogy,
Mm-hmm.
but what's the actual mechanism there?
Sure.
How does that heat trapping actually work?
So basically, the Earth receives energy from the sun in the form of sunlight.
Okay.
Some of that energy is reflected back into space,
Okay.
and some is absorbed by the Earth's surface and atmosphere.
Okay.
Greenhouse gases like CO2 absorb some of the outgoing infrared radiation, preventing it from escaping into space.
Oh.
This trapped heat leads to a warming of the Earth's surface and atmosphere,
Okay.
a phenomenon that we call the greenhouse effect.
Okay, that makes sense. So it seems like the consequences of this warming are already being felt around the world.
Yeah.
More extreme weather events,
Mhm.
rising sea levels,
Yeah.
melting glaciers.
Right.
It's pretty alarming.
It is alarming, and if we continue on this trajectory of oil dependence,
Right.
we're looking at some potentially pretty catastrophic consequences.
Oh, wow.
I mean, imagine coastal cities submerged under rising sea levels,
Wow.
widespread crop failures due to droughts and extreme heat,
Uh-huh.
mass displacement of people leading to resource scarcity and conflict.
Yeah, those what-if scenarios are pretty grim.
They are.
Um,
Yeah,
But what about the flip side?
sure.
What if we managed to kick our oil habit?
Right.
What would that future look like?
You know, imagine a world where the air is clean and fresh,
Okay.
where the climate is stable,
Oh.
and where we've transitioned to clean, renewable energy sources.
Okay.
Think about cities that are designed around walkability
Right.
and public transit powered by solar panels and wind turbines.
Yeah,
It's a future where we live in harmony with the planet, not at its expense.
that sounds pretty idyllic.
It does.
But let's be realistic.
Okay.
Getting there isn't going to be, I think a lot of people assume that just switching to renewables like solar and wind is like a quick fix.
Right.
But our sources suggest it's not that straightforward.
It's definitely not that straightforward.
You're right.
So what's holding us back?
Okay.
Why is it so difficult to break free from oil?
So there are a few key reasons.
Okay.
First, oil is still relatively cheap and readily available.
Uh-huh.
We've built our entire infrastructure around it.
Okay.
You know, think about the vast network of pipelines,
Right.
refineries,
Yeah.
gas stations that we rely on for transportation.
Yeah, it's true.
And then there's the sheer scale of the global oil industry
Uh-huh.
with its entrenched interests
All right.
and
Yeah.
powerful lobbying efforts.
So it sounds like there are some pretty significant obstacles to overcome.
Definitely.
But I'm sure our listeners are wondering, like, what can we actually do about it?
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything we can do as individuals to reduce our reliance on oil?
Absolutely. I mean, individual actions might seem small in the face of such a large-scale problem.
Yeah.
But they can have a ripple effect.
Okay.
So one of the most impactful things you can do is to reduce your consumption of plastic.
Yeah.
Plastic is a petroleum product.
Right.
So every piece of plastic that you avoid using helps to lessen demand for oil.
That's a good point. I think we often forget about that connection between plastic and oil.
Right.
I know I'm guilty of reaching for that plastic water bottle sometimes when I'm on the go.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder to be more mindful of our choices.
Exactly. And it's not just about avoiding single-use plastics like straws and bags.
Right.
It's about choosing products with less packaging.
Okay.
Buying in bulk when possible.
Uh-huh.
And opting for durable, reusable items over disposable ones.
So reducing our plastic consumption is a good place to start.
Definitely.
But what about transportation? That's a big one, right?
It's a huge one.
Especially with gas prices always fluctuating.
Transportation is a major source of oil demand.
Right.
And there are several things you can do to reduce your impact.
Opt for public transportation. Walking or cycling whenever possible. If you need to drive, consider carpooling. Or switching to a more fuel-efficient vehicle.
Right.
And if you're in the market for a new car, explore electric vehicles as an option.
So we've got reducing plastic use.
Right.
Making smarter transportation choices. What else can we do to chip away at this oil dependence?
Well, you can support businesses that are actively transitioning to renewable energy sources.
Okay.
Every dollar you spend is a vote for the kind of world you want to live in.
I like that.
And of course, using your voice to advocate for change is crucial.
Okay.
Support policies that promote clean energy, hold elected officials accountable, and let your representatives know that you care about this issue.
Those are all great tips.
Yeah.
But how much of a difference can individual actions really make?
That's a good question.
I mean, the oil industry is massive.
It is.
It sometimes feels like we're up against a giant.
Yeah, that's a valid point.
Yeah.
It can feel daunting.
Yeah.
But remember, change happens from the bottom up.
Right.
Individual actions, when multiplied by millions, create a powerful force. And when we combine those individual actions with collective action, advocating for policy changes, supporting clean energy businesses, and holding corporations accountable, we can start to shift the balance of power.
So it's about combining those everyday choices with a broader push for systemic change.
It is. It's about recognizing that we're all part of this system. And we all have a role to play in transforming it.
That's a really empowering message.
Yeah.
It's not about feeling helpless in the face of this giant problem.
Right.
It's about recognizing we have the power to make a difference.
That's the spirit. It's about reclaiming our agency.
Yeah.
And realizing that the future is not predetermined. It's something that we create together.
Okay, so we've talked about why we're so reliant on oil.
Right.
The downsides of that dependence.
Yeah.
And some steps we can take to start breaking free. But what does a truly oil-free future actually look like?
Okay.
What are some of the technologies and solutions that are being developed to help us get there?
Yeah.
We'll delve into that after a quick word from our sponsor.
Sounds good. So, before the break, we were discussing how, individual actions can contribute to a larger shift away from oil dependence.
Right.
And it's important to remember that this transition isn't just about, replacing one fuel source with another. It's about rethinking, our entire energy system.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
It's a system that's been built up over decades, so changing it won't happen overnight.
No.
But I'm curious, what are some of the key innovations that could actually help us break free from oil?
Well, we've talked about solar and wind power,
right,
which are already playing a significant role in the energy mix. But there are also some really exciting developments in areas like green hydrogen and advanced battery technology.
I've heard a bit about green hydrogen. But to be honest, I'm not entirely sure how it works. Can you break it down for us?
So green hydrogen is essentially hydrogen gas. That's produced using renewable energy sources like solar or wind power. And it's created through a process called electrolysis, where electricity is used to split water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen.
So water.
Yeah, just water.
Wow.
And what makes it so promising is that it's a clean fuel source that can be used in a variety of applications.
Like what?
From powering vehicles to generating electricity to producing heat for industrial processes.
So instead of burning fossil fuels, we could be using hydrogen created from sunlight and water.
Exactly.
That sounds pretty revolutionary.
It really is a game changer.
But what about the practicalities?
Yeah.
Is it actually feasible to produce and distribute green hydrogen on a large scale?
That's the challenge, and it's one that researchers and companies are actively working on.
Okay.
Scaling up production, developing efficient storage and transportation systems, and bringing down the cost of green hydrogen are all key hurdles that we need to overcome.
So it sounds like there's still a lot of work to be done.
Yeah.
But the potential is definitely there.
For sure.
What about battery technology? I know there's been a lot of buzz about advancements in that area.
Battery technology is advancing rapidly,
Okay.
which is essential for the transition to renewable energy.
Right.
We need batteries that can store large amounts of energy from intermittent sources like solar and wind, so we can have a reliable power supply even when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing.
Right.
And so we're seeing incredible progress in battery capacity, efficiency, and lifespan, which is making electric vehicles more practical and affordable.
That makes sense.
And enabling us to store more renewable energy on the grid.
It's amazing to think about how all these technological advancements are kind of converging to create a cleaner and more sustainable energy future.
It's pretty exciting.
But it's not just about technology, is it?
No, it's not.
There's also like a human element to this transition.
Absolutely. Technology can provide the tools, but it's ultimately up to us to use them wisely.
Right.
This transition requires like a shift in mindset, a recognition that we need to consume less, waste less, and make more conscious choices about how we live our lives.
You're touching on something that's been on my mind.
Okay.
Sometimes it feels like the message around climate change is all about like deprivation and sacrifice.
Yeah.
You know, give up your car, stop eating meat, turn off the lights.
Right.
But doesn't that just make people feel guilty and overwhelmed?
I think you've hit on a really important point.
Okay.
Fear and guilt are rarely effective motivators for long-term change.
Yeah.
I think instead we need to frame this transition as an opportunity to create a better world.
Okay.
A world that's not only more sustainable, but also more just and equitable.
I like that reframing opportunity over obligation.
Yeah.
But what does that actually look like in practice?
Well, it starts with recognizing that a cleaner energy future can actually bring a lot of benefits.
Okay.
Not just for the planet, but also for like our health, our communities, and our economies. So think about cities with cleaner air and less traffic congestion.
Right.
Rural communities powered by locally sourced renewable energy.
Yeah.
And millions of new jobs created in the clean energy sector.
Okay. Those are some pretty compelling reasons to get on board.
Totally.
But I imagine there are some people who are like resistant to change.
Of course.
Especially those whose livelihoods are tied to the fossil fuel industry.
Right.
So how do we address their concerns and ensure a just transition for everyone?
That's a crucial aspect of this conversation.
Yeah.
You know, we need to ensure that the shift to a clean energy economy doesn't leave anyone behind. And that means investing in retraining programs for workers in fossil fuel industries, supporting communities that are heavily reliant on fossil fuel extraction, and creating opportunities for everyone to benefit from the growth of the clean energy sector.
It sounds like there needs to be a concerted effort to bring everyone along on this journey.
For sure.
It can't just be about shutting down industries and leaving people behind.
And it needs to be a collaborative effort, a shared vision for a better future where everyone has a role to play.
Okay, so we've talked about the technological innovations that are driving this transition and the importance of a just and equitable approach.
Right.
But I'm curious, what are some of the policy changes that are actually needed to accelerate this shift away from oil dependence?
That's a big question, and there's no easy answer.
Right.
But I think one of the most important things is to level the playing field between fossil fuels and renewable energy.
Okay.
For decades, governments around the world have been subsidizing the fossil fuel industry, making it artificially cheap and difficult for clean energy to compete.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So we need to phase out those subsidies and invest in clean energy infrastructure research and development.
So it's about creating a policy environment that supports the growth of clean energy.
Exactly.
And incentivizes businesses and consumers to make the switch.
Yes.
What else needs to happen on a policy level?
Another key area is carbon pricing.
Okay.
Right now, the environmental costs of burning fossil fuels are not reflected in their price.
Right.
So we need to implement mechanisms like carbon taxes or cap-and-trade systems that put a price on carbon emissions, making polluters pay for the damage they cause.
Okay.
And this would create a financial incentive for companies to reduce their emissions and invest in cleaner technologies.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
If we want to move away from oil, we need to make it more expensive to pollute
Right.
and more affordable to choose clean energy.
Exactly.
But policy changes can be slow and complex,
They can.
especially with so many different interests at play.
Totally.
What can individuals do to push for these kinds of changes?
Well, one of the most powerful things you can do is vote for leaders who prioritize climate action and support policies that promote clean energy. But it goes beyond just casting a vote.
Okay.
You can also contact your elected officials, attend town hall meetings,
Right.
and make your voice heard on these issues.
Okay.
Support organizations that are advocating for clean energy policies, and get involved in local initiatives that are promoting sustainability in your community.
So it's about using our voices and our votes to demand change from our leaders
Yes.
and holding them accountable for their actions.
Exactly. And remember, collective action is what drives real change. When enough people speak up and demand a different future, our leaders are more likely to listen.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
From the technological solutions to the policy changes
Right.
to the individual actions that can help us transition to an oil-free future.
It's a lot to think about.
But I'm wondering, what does this transition actually mean for, like, the average person? How will our lives actually change in a world where oil is no longer the dominant energy source?
That's a great question. And while it's difficult to predict the future with certainty,
Right.
I think we can envision a world where our lives are powered by clean and renewable energy,
Okay.
where our cities are designed around walkability and public transit, and where we consume less and waste less.
I like that vision. But I'm sure our listeners are curious about, like, the specifics.
Right.
What are some of the tangible changes we might see in our daily lives as we move away from oil dependence?
Yeah.
We'll explore those ideas further after we take another quick break. Okay, so before the break, we were talking about what daily life might look like in an oil-free future.
Right.
And it's one thing to talk about, abstract concepts like clean energy
Yeah.
and sustainable living. But how will this actually affect our day-to-day routines?
Yeah, you're right. It's all about connecting the dots between the big picture and the personal experience. So let's imagine you wake up one morning in this oil-free future.
Okay.
One of the first changes you might notice is the air quality. Without the constant exhaust fumes from cars and trucks,
Right.
the air would be much cleaner and fresher.
Interesting.
And that would mean fewer respiratory problems, especially for people living in cities.
Yeah,
And it would just be more enjoyable to be outside.
that's a great point.
Yeah.
Clean air is something we often take for granted, but it has such a huge impact on our health and well-being.
It really does.
I can only imagine how much better life would be if we weren't constantly breathing in pollutants from burning fossil fuels.
It's a big difference.
So what else might be different in this oil-free world?
Well, think about your morning commute.
Okay.
Our transportation systems would look totally different.
How so?
Public transportation would be much more efficient and widespread. Electric buses and trains would replace the ones that run on diesel.
Right.
And personal vehicles would be mostly electric.
Okay.
And the infrastructure to support electric cars.
Like charging stations and battery swap facilities would be everywhere.
Okay.
And cities would be designed for walkability and bikeability.
Yeah.
So lots of people might choose to walk or bike to work.
It's interesting to think about a world where cities are designed for people, not just cars.
Yeah, it's a different way of thinking about urban planning.
It seems like a pretty simple concept, but it would make such a huge difference.
Definitely.
What about our homes?
Okay.
How would they be different in an oil-free future?
Well, our homes would be powered by renewable energy.
Okay.
Solar panels on rooftops would be everywhere.
Yeah.
And communities might even have their own microgrids,
Oh, wow.
generating and sharing electricity locally.
Okay.
Home appliances would be much more energy efficient.
Okay.
And we might even see a shift to more localized production and consumption of goods.
Right.
So we wouldn't have to rely so much on long-distance transportation. So it's not just about switching to electric cars and solar panels. It's a more fundamental shift in how we design our communities and our homes
Exactly.
to be more sustainable and self-sufficient.
It's about creating a more resilient and localized way of life.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And this shift would probably extend to, like, how we produce and consume food, too. Right?
Of course, agriculture is a major source of greenhouse gases.
Right.
In an oil-free future, we'd probably see a move toward more sustainable farming practices.
Okay, like what?
Like vertical farms in cities to cut down on transportation costs and emissions,
Mm.
and a bigger focus on plant-based diets,
Right.
which have a much lower environmental impact than meat-heavy diets.
It's incredible to think about how interconnected everything is.
Yeah.
From the air we breathe to the food we eat to the way we get around.
It's all connected.
It seems like moving away from oil would touch every part of our lives.
It really would. And while it might seem like a really daunting task
Yeah.
to overhaul our whole way of life,
Right.
It's important to remember that it doesn't have to happen overnight.
That's true.
It'll be a gradual process with small changes that eventually add up to a big shift.
That makes me feel a little better.
Yeah.
It's not about making these big changes all at once. It's about those baby steps that build up over time.
Exactly. Each step we take, no matter how small, gets us closer to a better future. A future that's cleaner, healthier, and more sustainable for all of us.
For everyone.
Yeah, and for the generations to come.
Speaking of future generations, I think it's really important to point out that this transition isn't just about convenience or the latest technology. It's about creating a world that's livable and equitable for everyone.
You're absolutely right. Climate change is already having a big impact on vulnerable communities.
Yeah.
And if we stay on our current path, the consequences will be devastating.
Right.
This transition is about making sure everyone has a just and livable future.
So it's about more than saving the planet. It's about saving ourselves and making sure humanity has a better future.
It's a big responsibility, but I think we're up to the challenge.
Well, I hope our listeners are taking this to heart.
Me too. Because ultimately, the future isn't something that just happens to us.
Right.
It's something we create.
Yeah.
Through the choices we make, the things we do, and our determination to build a better world.
That's so well said. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the complex world of oil and the possibilities of an oil-free future.
It's been quite a journey.
It has, and I want to thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And to our listeners, we encourage you to take everything you've learned today and turn it into action.
Yeah, make a difference.
Make those conscious choices in your everyday lives.
Absolutely.
Support those businesses and policies that match up with your values.
For sure.
And speak up. Advocate for a cleaner and more sustainable world.
Your voice matters.
Because every step we take, no matter how small, brings us closer to that brighter future.
I believe that.
So thank you all so much for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening.